Metcalfe states in an interview with Astral Noise, "Ultimately, the origin of my depression is overdetermined. Everything from dysphoria, everyday transphobia, regret, unrequited love, mentally ill love, queerness, and a good dose of contingency all fall into the mix. There is not a single thing, especially not something like a chemical imbalance, that causes it. Depression is often just socioeconomic alienation because of a sick society or mode of production rather than something merely individual. Hopefully, that element is apparent in the work." As a lover of both film and music, one of my favorite post templates to create on Instagram is a film/album comparison. I've done posts on various subgenres of music in which I attempt to pinpoint the qualities that compose a given genre and translate them to film to create several mini canon lists. I plan to use these existing posts to create videos surrounding on topics that have already been covered on my profile, but I want to start this series on YouTube by comparing a singular album to a film trilogy. Uboa is the musical project of Australian-based Xandra Metcalfe. Her work never remains stagnant in form. The drone, noise, ambient, industrial, darkwave, and metal genres are all deconstructed throughout her discography. The Origin of My Depression, her most well-known album, was released in 2019 and gained traction online through music forums. Sonically harsh in the most intriguing of ways, contemporary comparisons can be drawn with other artists' work like Lingua Ignota's Caligula, Shoo Shoo's Ignore Grief, and Gnaw Their Tongues' All the Dread Magnificence of Perversity. Metcalfe cites Planning for Burial as one of the main inspirations for The Origin of My Depression, which also belongs to the same label, The Flenser. The earlier entries in Metcalfe's discography are more metal-oriented, and they're available on her Bandcamp to listen to for free if you want to track her progression as an artist. Please Get Home Safe, a collaboration done with Slumber Kitty, is one I find particularly underrated. You can't go wrong with the post-rock and ambient fusion. I recommend at least listening to The Origin of My Depression before watching the rest of the video. The album is thematically unflinching and devastating, thrusting the listener into an abyss of pain. Generating an unrestrained, palpable rawness, Metcalfe deconstructs our audible comfort zone, juxtaposing ambience with harsh noise. This here channels a fraction of the pain that so many of those who transition and struggle with their mental health go through, granting the listener a chance to empathize as much as experience. Every molecule of air here is transformed into cosmic machinery, resulting in a one-of-a-kind sensory jolt. Impossible Light was released on June 28th of this year, pleasantly surprising us supporters. It's one of my favorite albums released this decade. Touching on similar themes of The Origin of My Depression, like gender dysphoria and mental illness, there's a newfound glimmer of optimism that arises with both its title and cover. An amalgamation of experiences that render stagnation useless, a self-dubbed cinematic hyper-noise identity forms. Ambient/drone stalwart Lawrence English mastered the entirety of the work. Metcalfe's field recordings in particular are close to his. The record sonically mirrors the art featured on its cover. A bright light shines, beckoning those to look at it. It's forceful but seemingly pure, ultimately bound to reach its destination sooner or later. The walls are closing in, and remnants of corroded concrete are visible under the harshness of the beam itself. Taken from the Bandcamp description, Metcalfe kept the lyrical content of this record as a time capsule of the catastrophic ups and downs and rapidly changing environments within herself and in the world from 2018 to 2023. The opening track, Phthalates, sends electrical, metallic reverberations through the air. Imagine being trapped inside of a circuit board. The juxtaposition between screaming and drone is prominent, resembling an out-of-body experience via pure pulsating human emotion. Expressing the audible qualities of this album through words doesn't quite feel right. Her music transcends logical translation, much like the filmmaker I'm about to discuss. While the lyrical content of the album remains important, the cinematic rendering of the soundscapes conjured by the production is what I'd like to specifically highlight. Certain musicians align themselves closely with the tenets of poetry. Many in the singer-songwriter genre aim to use their lyrical prowess to conjure emotion. One of my favorite artists of all time, Jason Molina, who worked primarily in the project Songs Ohia and the Magnolia Electric Company, grounds his lyrics in repetition and evocative yet simple language. Instrumentation in the album Didn't It Rain is driven through these poetic musings. Fragile and fleeting, each word uttered takes a precedence above all, establishing a dynamic that widely differs from genres that place a higher emphasis on instrumentation. There is a small group of directors whose work I would argue must solely remain confined within the cinematic medium. the French auteur Philippe Grandrieux being a prime example. Having qualities in his filmography that are comparable to those of Leighton Pierce or Anne Charlotte Robertson, Grandrieux's feature-length narrative work, thinly veiled in presentation, in particular retains its avant-garde sensibilities by stripping away the building blocks of cinematic structure to their core. However, I want to focus on Grandrieux's lesser-known, non-narrative Unrest Trilogy, which offers a side of cinema that cannot be replicated by using any other technique or artistic medium. I approach Metcalfe's music from a similar point of view. The track Endocrine Disruptor channels the struggle between rationale and emotion as instrumentation and vocals battle for the structural spotlight. A puzzle and Gordian worm each begin with dense layering. Flashes of destruction reveal themselves through repetition. The best way I can describe its cinematic rendering would be if a black hole collapsed inside of itself. Rhythm begins to take precedence slowly. Drums seemingly lead a maelstrom of energy further into an abyss. If you've never heard the song before, chances are what you audibly imagine from what I just described to you would not match the actual sound of the track. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines the word kinetic as of or relating to the motion of material bodies and the forces and energy associated therewith. Kinetic art is interpreted to be art, such as sculpture or assemblage, having mechanical parts that can be set in motion. Metcalfe's music relates to the first term, in my opinion. Her experience of being trans that she shares with us is conveyed through the intense portrayals of energy she grants to us in her songs. Grandrieux turns processes of human energy into mechanical forces in his films. Movement makes way for light and shadow. Many of my favorite experimental films tend to generate feelings that I somehow yearn for but never actually realized existed in the first place. I'll touch more on the topic in a future video surrounding the avant-garde, but it's important to understand the differences between a traditional narrative structure, a non-linear narrative structure, and a non-narrative structure. The same should be applied to what constitutes as experimental in of itself, an attribution that I feel can be easily misinterpreted. Experimentation is not synonymous with abstraction. Canonized gateway works such as Maya Deren's Meshes of the Afternoon, Hans Richter's Ghosts Before Breakfast, and Dudley Murphy's Ballet Mécanique are all closely aligned with artistic movements founded outside of cinema, such as Dadaism, Cubism, and Surrealism. There's an abundance of academic-heavy discourse surrounding these as a whole that sometimes gives off a film school impression, and while art history does often overlap with experimentation in cinema, simplicity is equally easy to discover. While genres often function as categorical associations, Impossible Light's structure shouldn't be seen as an attempt to overcomplicate the experience for the listener. Metcalfe states, "I think a few musicians would already know the idea of having something in your head, a sound that exists in between already existing ideas and genres. Whether it is completely unique is subjective and completely secondary to the idea of getting something out of my head into external reality. A lot of it is just translating music that plays in my head by default. It's kind of like automatic writing sometimes." Musicians and filmmakers translate the personal into works that convey a feeling otherwise restrained by other forms of expression. For instance, Al Wong's 1977 film Twin Peaks combines the experience of a road trip across San Francisco with the sound of ocean waves. One of my favorite filmmakers, James Benning, channels the power contained within locations unlike anyone else. Bennings' 2004 film, 10 Skies, is just, you guessed it, 10 shots of skies. While in theory, yes, anyone could easily go outside right now and film 10 shots of skies, the intent and feeling behind Bennings' film remains his until it is shared with us. I find new avenues of exploration every time I think about his work. Take Lost, for instance, which features 35 shots of Los Angeles, each 2.5 minutes long. By the end of the film, it becomes your city as much as it is his. A feat that can be achieved even if you've never been to the actual location. Non-narrative cinema isn't all about throwing random symbolism onto a screen to garner over-analysis, but oftentimes an attempt at translating a feeling or answering a simple question. In Grandrieux's case, the question is, where do images come from? He ventures into the unknown through unfiltered means, capturing the stream of consciousness only attainable through the hybridity of cinema here. If you've seen a few of my other videos, you will know of my appreciation for structural film. By utilizing the pace of this genre, a singular subject is fixated upon, allowing the audience to navigate a space that becomes familiar through temporal elongation. The dark ambient atmosphere contained in Metcalfe's work is similar in its relationship to time. Audible dead space is filled by time's connection with silence, allowing each transition to flow with ease. The beginning of the track, Pattern Screamers, features a string-based introduction. It's as if an angel is working to quell a gloominess that refuses to be contained. Guttural screams cry out, timbre breaks free amongst the chaos, and silence lingers in the background. Empathizing with Metcalfe's journey contributes to the meaning of the work, giving it a context unbounded by humanity. Her thoughts have manifested themselves through music, channeling the power of spoken word with a medium unbound by the limits of permutation. Words have a semblance of universality, original instrumentation does not. No one could ever generate the same sounds as her. Each medium structure paves the way for self-referentiality, purpose unlocks meaning, and the key is given to the viewer by the artist. Why would you bother going outside when all the grass is dead? The first film in Grandrieux's trilogy is titled White Epilepsy, an apt title for the sensory experience it provides. How can epilepsy have a color? It's a non-narrative work concerned with the shapes of the human body and its connection with our environment, akin to performance art. Much like Impossible Light, intense feelings are found between dynamic contrasting forces, light and darkness, obscured movement, trapped in an alien resin made of tar. Time slows to a halt. Think of the alluring abyss scenes in Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin. Nude bodies attempt to commingle with each other in their environment. The awkwardness of movement is eradicated entirely. Impossible Light's seventh track is titled Weaponized Dysphoria. It features two short lyrics. Please God, kill the boy in me. Feelings translate into kinetic energy here. Nothing is left unrealized. Attempting to climb out of the murkiness, a primal rage assumes itself. The light emerges and peace is briefly tangible. Drawn-out strings signify a change has occurred. Vibrations extend beyond ordinary timbre here. A primordial energy emanates from within. Abstractions force illusions of artificial light as our eyes begin to shut, focusing on the harsh noises. The listener enters her mind by way of words until the sounds make way for the rest, flooding any sense of structure and stability granted to us. Grandrieux employs a similar method of consistent tonal shifting. 51 minutes into White Epilepsy, a woman appears breaking the trance. Her mouth is bloody as drones fill the soundtrack. Fear of the darkness transforms into fear of the unknown. In this case, the solution to what the audience thinks will dissipate the stagnant emotion, light, turns out to only solidify its new form of fear. Hair soon blends in what appears to be thin plants, and as the camera's field of vision increasingly blurs, the shot eventually transitions into the direct point of view gaze hovering over the top of an older man's head. Interpretation plays a large role in the avant-garde. Films released in the 1920s like The Dance of the Paroxysms and The Sea Cell and the Clergyman are littered with symbolism and impressionistic imagery. However, while their narratives are certainly thin, White Epilepsy's interpretation lies not within its story, or lack of it, but its emotional effect. Sonically speaking, its structure mirrors that of the techniques outlined in the principle of musique concrète, as well as the natural tendencies of field recordings. Improvisation is abundant throughout the Unrest Trilogy, but it doesn't come from a primary source. Choreography and movement are not dictated by the camera work or directing, but by the subjects themselves. Drawing a parallel to Impossible Light, I find the prowess of the metallic percussion featured in it and other death industrial-based albums to be so effective when combined with extremes. After watching a White Epilepsy, the viewer might be closer to answering the question posed, but will we ever know what the images mean? The second film in the trilogy, Murderess, was released in 2015, 3 years after the first. Anatomy is rendered amorphous here. The camera is at first positioned to highlight every part of the body other than the face. Extreme close-ups on arms, legs, feet, and thighs function as parts of an unfinished clay sculpture. Color-wise, warm vibrancy replaces the harsh grays as the light mimics the skin tones of those on screen. The track Sleep Hygiene signifies the importance of Metcalfe's environment. This bed is my body, I rest and do nothing. Like death, unproductive, I feel safe and be nobody. The laws of physics are seemingly abandoned in Murderess. Limbs contort, bodies float, and fluidity arrives and abandons itself in varying degrees. I'd refer to the humans in this film as organisms here. Their movement is primal and cellular-like. It's as if a computer attempted to render a visualization of human-based mitosis only to reverse the process before it's fully complete. Thunder rumbles and the sounds fade in and out with the visuals. Nudity is rampant, but is it inherently sexual? The extended sequences of colliding bodies that shift between various degrees of darkness are mesmerizing. and is possibly one of the prime examples of chiaroscuro in film. Chiaroscuro literally translates to light dark, and is a technique that highlights a stark contrast in darkness and light. See Giovanni Baglioni's painting Divine Love Conquering Earthly Love here for an applicable example that relates strongly to Murderess. Echoing convulsions is catharsis. Struggle is conveyed through a glimpse of restrained energy. The woman yearns to escape this indescribable feeling, but is prevented from doing so, as the slow motion and frame manipulation suggest. Trauma is tackled in Impossible Light through antithetical forces, as she attempts to overcome her struggles or those imposed by the world. Despite the album's unwavering sonic ambition, it does a remarkable job of trapping the listener in a world of its originality. Unrest, released in 2017, opens with a surprisingly bright scene that utilizes both a nauseating shakiness and superimposition. This sequence features what is easily the most rhythm-driven portion of the trilogy's respective soundtracks, becoming overly upbeat compared to what we expect. It is the only film out of the three that does not primarily feature the use of a vertical aspect ratio as well, contributing to the jarring presence of a background that isn't pure darkness. An otherwise pleasant and uninterrupted shot of trees is broken by a woman fulfilling her desires. As we are now accustomed to the tonal shifts near the end of the films, Grandrieux now places it just after 10 minutes. Whispers murmur throughout the dark, screams and violent movements break out. It stops. The woman is suspended in time and space. Graphic nudity is shown, but stripped of the arguable eroticism previously featured. The self cannot exist without isolation. Are humans the same without nature? The final scene in the film is of the same woman at the beginning, now clothed as she slowly rotates and moves laterally. The trance continues, but the gloom remains. Visceral and harrowing, it's interesting to recognize how words are never spoken by anyone on screen, not even once throughout the entire trilogy. Only the void welcomes them. The final track of the album is titled Impossible Light / Golden Flower. It's an amalgamation of every emotion presented so far, retaining a reluctant hopefulness, mirroring Grandrieux's approach. Don't give up before the war is lost. There is still light at the end of infinity. You just need to get up and run. I saw the ghost of the boy I was. I mourned the corpse of the girl I love. The record concludes with a touching lyric. She must rise and face the light where she can be herself in body and mind. Impossible Light dives fearlessly into queer sexuality, trans embodiment, grief for those who couldn't make it, solidarity for those facing unimaginable discrimination, the toxic spread of transphobic hatred and misinformation, and the ultimate hope of recovery from trauma and mental anguish. This is a record about the light at the end of the tunnel and the power it takes to keep moving towards it. Reading this gives the work a personal feeling that influences the way one engages with it. Metcalfe's willingness to share her pain and hope reminds us of the importance of connection in art, to guide us toward love and acceptance in all forms. Grandrieux encourages us to continue to ask questions and to further discover ourselves, the frequencies and rhythms of life. Our bodies and music each borrow and give to one another. These four works of art are unrelenting and fundamentally contrasting in their methods, ultimately finding the capabilities of their respective artistic mediums to the fullest. Obliteration of the binaural, squinting of the eyes. We are forced to stages of movement in some manner through the physical experiencing of these works, channeling a kinetic energy unbounded by distance. They are impeccable examples of breaking free from conventions imposed on music and cinema, and I implore you to seek them out and let the light in and the abyss welcome you. Thank you very much for watching. I truly appreciate it.